13-year-old daughter tells her father that she saw her stepmother talking horrible things about him and the girl on the phone. So he decides to hide under the bed to listen to her at a certain moment and discovers the whole truth about his new wife. But before we move on to the video, subscribe to the channel and give me a suggestion in the comments of which story you would like to see here. The late afternoon sun cast a warm golden light over the modest suburban house where 13-year-old Ava lived with her father, Ben. Their home was cozy, filled with memories of Ava's late mother, pictures lining the shelves, soft blankets draped across the couch, and the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. Ava liked to think these details kept her mother's presence alive, even though she had passed away 3 years ago. Ava sat at her desk by the window, scribbling in her diary. It was her safe space, a place where she could confide her innermost thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. Today, her entry was about her dad's new wife, Jessica. Ava bit her lip as she wrote, pausing to glance at her closed bedroom door, as though Jessica might somehow hear her thoughts through the walls. Jessica had entered their lives about a year ago, quickly sweeping Ben off his feet with her effortless charm and beauty. At first, Ava had been hopeful. Maybe Jessica would be kind, someone who could bring some light back into her father's life. But things hadn't turned out that way. Jessica always seemed to wear a mask. Around Ben, she was cheerful and sweet, showering him with compliments and affection. Around Ava, though, her demeanor shifted. She wasn't outright mean, but there was a subtle coldness, a sharp edge to her words that Ava couldn't ignore. "Ava," Ben's voice carried up the stairs. "Dinner's ready." Closing her diary and tucking it safely under her pillow, Ava sighed. She was really trying, to make this new family dynamic work for her dad's sake. She knew how much he loved Jessica, and she didn't want to be the reason for any tension. When Ava entered the dining room, Jessica was already setting the table, her perfectly manicured nails clinking against the plates. "There you are," Jessica said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We were starting to wonder if you'd decided to skip dinner." "Sorry," Ava mumbled, taking her seat. Ben looked up from a spot at the head of the table, his face lighting up when he saw his daughter. "How's my girl doing?" he asked warmly. "I'm fine, Dad," Ava replied, forcing a small smile. She didn't want to ruin his good mood. As they ate, Jessica skillfully steered the conversation, keeping Ben's attention focused on her. She talked about her plans for the upcoming weekend, an outing to a spa, a lunch with friends, always painting herself as busy and important. Ava stayed mostly quiet, only chiming in when Ben asked her a direct question. After dinner, Ava excused herself and retreated to her room. She opened her diary again, the words spilling out of her pen faster than she could organize her thoughts. "I don't know why Dad can't see it. Jessica is so fake. She's only nice to him when she wants something. And the way she looks at me like I'm just in the way. Maybe I'm imagining it, but I don't think I am." A knock at her door startled her. Quickly, she closed the diary and shoved it under her pillow again. "Come in," she called, her voice steady. Ben stepped in, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Hey, kiddo. I just wanted to check on you." Ava smiled softly. "I'm okay, Dad. Just tired." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I know things haven't been easy with the changes lately, but Jessica really cares about us, Ava. I hope you'll give her a chance." Ava wanted to tell him everything, to explain how Jessica acted when he wasn't around, but she hesitated. Would he even believe her? She didn't want to hurt him, especially when he looked so happy for the first time in years. "I'll try," Ava said instead, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder before leaving the room. Later that night, Ava couldn't sleep. Something about Jessica's behavior during dinner had felt especially off. She kept replaying moments in her head. The fake smile, the subtle digs masked as jokes, the way Jessica's eyes flickered with something almost like annoyance whenever Ben looked away. Deciding to grab a glass of water, Ava tiptoed downstairs. As she passed by the kitchen, she froze. Jessica's voice carried softly from the living room, where she was on the phone. "She's insufferable," Jessica was saying, her tone sharp. "I don't care how much he loves that brat. Once I have what I want, I'm done pretending. This isn't forever. I'm not playing house with them for the rest of my life." Ava's heart raced as she pressed herself against the wall, listening. Jessica's voice dropped lower, but Ava caught fragments of the conversation, something about money, something about making Ben see reason. Ava clenched her fists, her chest tightening with anger and fear. How could Jessica talk about them that way? About her dad? She waited until Jessica hung up the phone and went upstairs before returning to her room. Her mind was racing. Should she tell her dad? What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was trying to cause trouble? Unable to sleep, Ava pulled out her diary again. She doesn't care about Dad. She doesn't care about me. She's just pretending. But how do I make Dad see the truth? The chapter ends with Ava staring at the ceiling, determined to find a way to protect her father from the woman she now saw as a threat. The morning after overhearing Jessica's phone conversation, Ava woke up with a knot in her stomach. The words she'd heard replayed in her mind on a loop, each one cutting deeper than the last. She couldn't shake the thought that Jessica was manipulating her dad, using his love and trust against him. Ava sat at the breakfast table, quietly stirring her cereal as Jessica moved around the kitchen. Jessica hummed softly, her usual polished and pleasant facade firmly in place. Ava couldn't stand it. How could someone be so fake and so convincing at the same time? "You're awfully quiet this morning, Ava," Jessica said, glancing over her shoulder. "Something on your mind?" Ava stiffened, her grip tightening on her spoon. "No," she replied quickly. Jessica smiled, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something calculating. "You know, if there's ever anything you want to talk about, I'm here. I'd hate for there to be tension between us." Ava didn't respond. She could feel Jessica watching her, but she kept her eyes fixed on her bowl. Thankfully, Ben walked into the kitchen at that moment, breaking the tension. "Good morning, girls," Ben said cheerfully, kissing Ava on the top of her head before turning to Jessica. "What's the plan for today?" "Oh, I thought I'd run some errands," Jessica replied, slipping seamlessly into her usual sweet tone. "Maybe pick up some things for the house. Ava, would you like to come with me?" Ava nearly choked on her cereal. Jessica never invited her to go anywhere. This sudden gesture felt wrong, like Jessica was trying to keep up appearances. "No, thanks," Ava said quickly, avoiding her dad's questioning gaze. Jessica shrugged, her smile never wavering. "Suit yourself." Later that afternoon, Ava found her dad in the garage, working on some project he'd been tinkering with for weeks. The sight of him, focused and at ease, made her chest ache. She didn't want to ruin his happiness, but she couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Dad?" Ava's voice wavered as she stepped into the garage. Ben looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Hey, kiddo. What's up?" Ava hesitated, her stomach twisting into knots. "I need to tell you something." "It's about Jessica?" Ben's expression shifted, his brow furrowing with concern. "What about her?" Taking a deep breath, Ava told him everything she'd heard the night before. She didn't leave out a single detail, even though every word felt heavier than the last. When she finished, Ben stood in silence, his face unreadable. "You're sure that's what you heard?" he asked finally, his voice measured. "Yes," Ava said firmly. "I wouldn't make this up, Dad. I swear." Ben sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Ava, I'm not saying I don't believe you, but this is a big accusation. Jessica's never given me any reason to doubt her." "She's just really good at pretending," Ava said, her voice rising with frustration. "You don't see the way she acts when you're not around. She doesn't care about us, Dad. She's only here because she wants something." Ben rubbed his temples, clearly conflicted. "Ava, I know you're still adjusting to everything. And I know Jessica isn't your mom." "She's nothing like Mom," Ava interrupted, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mom loved us. She was kind. Jessica's just pretending to care. The emotion in Ava's voice seemed to reach Ben, and for a moment, he looked uncertain. But then he shook his head. I don't know, Ava. I need more than just your word. Jessica hasn't done anything to make me think she'd hurt us. Ava felt a pang of hurt at his words, but she refused to give up. Fine, she said quietly. But just pay attention, okay? Watch her. See if you notice anything. Ben hesitated, then nodded. Okay, I'll keep an eye out. But Ava, you have to give her a chance too. Can you do that for me? Ava didn't answer. She turned and walked out of the garage, her heart heavy. Over the next few days, Ben did start paying closer attention to Jessica. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She was her usual charming self, always smiling, always saying the right things. But then Ben began to notice little things he might not have thought twice about before. There were the phone calls she always took in private, lowering her voice whenever he came near. There were the subtle changes in her demeanor when she thought he wasn't looking, the way her smile would fade, her posture would stiffen. And then there was the receipt he found in the trash. It was from a high-end boutique, listing items he didn't recognize. When he asked Jessica about it, she waved it off, saying it was a gift for a friend. But the way she avoided his eyes made him uneasy. Ben didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the doubts were starting to grow. Meanwhile, Ava watched her dad closely, hoping he was starting to see what she saw. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, she hesitated before speaking. Have you noticed anything off? She asked cautiously. Ben looked at her, his expression thoughtful. Maybe, he admitted, but I still don't have any real proof. Then find some, Ava said quietly. You have to, Dad. Before it's too late. Ben didn't respond right away. He stared at the floor, his mind clearly racing. Finally, he nodded. I will, he said. I'll figure this out. The chapter ends with Ben making a silent vow to uncover the truth, no matter what it might cost him. The night was still, with only the faint hum of crickets filling the air as Ben sat in his office, staring at the dim glow of his desk lamp. He couldn't stop thinking about what Ava had said. Her words replayed over and over, blending with the subtle doubts that had been creeping into his mind. Jessica's smiles, her reassurances, even her affection, it all seemed real. But Ava's conviction couldn't be ignored. Ben leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He didn't want to believe that the woman he'd let into his home, into his life, was capable of such deceit. But something in the pit of his stomach told him he couldn't dismiss Ava's concerns any longer. He had to know the truth. The next day, Ben decided to start paying closer attention to Jessica's actions. He noticed how often she excused herself to make phone calls, always speaking in hushed tones. When she returned, she was quick to flash him a smile, as if nothing was amiss. It was subtle, but now that he was looking for it, Ben began to see cracks in the facade. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Jessica's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and immediately stood up. I'll just be a minute, she said sweetly, leaving the room. Ben exchanged a look with Ava, who had been quietly picking at her food. He could see the question in her eyes, but he shook his head slightly. Now wasn't the time. Later that night, after Jessica had gone to bed, Ben searched the trash can in the kitchen. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt compelled to dig deeper. Among the discarded receipts and crumpled napkins, he found a piece of paper torn in half. When he pieced it together, his chest tightened. It was a note with bank account details scribbled on it. The account wasn't one he recognized. Ben's hands shook as he placed the note back where he found it. He couldn't confront Jessica, not yet. He needed more evidence. The turning point came 2 nights later. Ben was in the living room, pretending to read, when he overheard Jessica on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made him pause. Yes, everything's fine, she was saying. No, he hasn't suspected anything. Ava? She's just a kid. She won't be a problem. Once the papers are signed, I'll be done with all of this. Ben's heart sank. His worst fears were being confirmed. But he couldn't act on fragments of a conversation. He needed undeniable proof. That was when Ava suggested the idea that had been gnawing at the back of her mind for days. You should hide and listen to her, Ava said the next morning, her voice barely above a whisper. She always talks on the phone in her room. If you hide, you'll hear everything. Ben hesitated. The thought of sneaking into Jessica's room felt invasive, even wrong. But then he thought about the stakes, his family, his daughter, everything he had worked for. If Jessica was truly using him, he had to know. That night, Ben waited until Jessica went upstairs. He gave her enough time to settle in before quietly making his way to the hallway. He crouched outside her door, listening for any sound. When he heard her soft voice through the door, he knew she was on the phone. His heart pounded as he opened the door just enough to slip inside, his movements slow and deliberate. Jessica's back was to him as she paced the room, her phone pressed to her ear. Ben slid under the bed, his breath shallow as he positioned himself as quietly as possible. I've told you, it's just a matter of time, Jessica was saying, her voice low but filled with irritation. Ben is completely clueless. He thinks I care about him, about this family. It's almost pathetic how easy it's been. Ben's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to remain still. I know, she continued. I just have to keep playing the part a little longer. Once everything is finalized, I'll transfer the funds, and we're out of here. I'm not staying in this house 1 second longer than I have to. Her words were like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. Ben felt a mixture of rage and heartbreak swelling in his chest. How had he been so blind? And the girl? The voice on the other end of the call was muffled, but Ben could tell Jessica's tone changed slightly. She's the least of my concerns, Jessica said coldly. She's just a kid. She doesn't matter. Ben couldn't listen any longer. He slid out from under the bed, his face pale but set with determination. Jessica turned mid-sentence, her eyes widening in shock when she saw him. Ben, she stammered, lowering the phone. What are you? Save it, Ben said, his voice low but firm. I heard everything. Jessica's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before his eyes. How long? Ben demanded, his voice rising. How long have you been lying to me? Manipulating me? Planning to steal from me? Jessica's expression hardened, her fear giving way to defiance. You have no idea what you're talking about, she snapped. You don't understand. Don't you dare try to deny it, Ben interrupted. I heard every word. You don't care about me, about Ava. You're just here for the money. The room was thick with tension as Jessica struggled to regain control of the situation. Ben, she said, her tone suddenly soft. I didn't mean any of that. You have to understand. Stop, Ben said, his voice shaking. Just stop. You've said enough. The chapter ends with Jessica standing frozen, realizing her lies have unraveled, and Ben walking out of the room, his heart heavy, but his resolve stronger than ever. Ben stood in the hallway outside Jessica's room, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The weight of her betrayal was unbearable, but he knew he had to hold it together, for Ava, for himself, and for the life they had fought to rebuild after his first wife's death. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, love, and the family he thought he was building. Jessica stepped out of the room a moment later, her expression carefully controlled, though there was a flash of fear in her eyes. She had recovered quickly, slipping back into her practiced charm. Ben, she began softly, let's talk about this. You've misunderstood. I've misunderstood? Ben's voice was low, but filled with anger. He took a step toward her, and for the first time since he had met her, Jessica seemed unsure of herself. You were planning to rob me blind, to leave me and Ava behind as if we meant nothing. Do you really think you can talk your way out of this? Jessica sighed, her mask slipping just slightly. Look, maybe I said some things I shouldn't have, she admitted, crossing her arms defensively. But you don't understand what it's been like for me. This hasn't been easy, Ben. Do you have any idea how much I've sacrificed to be here? Ben stared at her, incredulous. Sacrificed? You married me under false pretenses, Jessica. You pretended to care about me, about my daughter, all while scheming to take everything I've worked for. And now you want me to feel sorry for you? Jessica's expression hardened, and for the first time, her true self began to show. You're so naive, Ben, she said, her voice cold. You think love is enough? That playing house with you and your spoiled daughter was some kind of dream come true for me? I deserve more than this. I deserve a life of comfort, and I was willing to put up with you to get it. But now that you've ruined everything, I guess there's no point in pretending anymore. Her words hit Ben like a physical blow, but he stood his ground. You don't deserve anything, he said, his voice firm. Not my trust, not my money, and certainly not my family. I want you out of this house by tomorrow. Jessica laughed bitterly. You think it's that simple? You can't just throw me out, Ben. I'm your wife. Legally, I have rights. Do you really want to drag this out in court? Ben clenched his fists, his mind racing. He knew Jessica was right. This wouldn't be an easy battle. But he wasn't going to let her win. Do whatever you need to do, he said finally. Call a lawyer. File a claim, I don't care. But I promise you this. You will not set foot in this house again after tomorrow. Do you understand me? Jessica opened her mouth to retort, but before she could speak, a small voice interrupted them. Dad. Both Ben and Jessica turned to see Ava standing at the top of the stairs, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening, and she refused to hide in her room while her father faced this alone. Ava, Ben said softly, his tone immediately gentler. He stepped toward her, but she shook her head. No, Dad, I need to say something. Ava looked directly at Jessica, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. I don't care what you think of me, or what you say about me behind my back. But you don't get to hurt my dad. You don't get to ruin our family. Jessica's mouth twisted into a sneer. Oh, please. Spare me the dramatic speech, Ava. This has nothing to do with you. Yes, it does. Ava shot back, surprising even herself with the force of her words. You've been lying to him, using him, pretending to care about us. But you don't get to win. We don't need you. Jessica's expression faltered for a moment, and Ben felt a surge of pride at his daughter's courage. He stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Ava's shoulder. She's right, he said firmly. We don't need you, Jessica. We never did. Jessica looked between the two of them, her composure cracking under the weight of their united front. She knew she had lost. Without another word, she turned and stormed back into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, Jessica packed her things and left the house. She didn't say goodbye, and neither Ben nor Ava tried to stop her. The air in the house felt lighter the moment the door closed behind her, as though a dark cloud had finally lifted. Ben and Ava sat at the kitchen table in silence for a long time, both of them processing everything that had happened. Finally, Ben spoke. I'm so sorry, Ava, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I should have listened to you sooner. I should have seen the signs. Ava shook her head. It's not your fault, Dad. She fooled both of us. He reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm and steady. But you were the one who stood up for us, who told the truth even when I didn't want to hear it. I'm so proud of you, Ava. You're stronger than I ever realized. Ava smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. I just didn't want to lose you, Dad. You're all I have. Ben pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly as they both let their emotions pour out. It wasn't going to be easy moving forward, but for the first time in a long time, they felt like a real family again. The days following Jessica's departure were quiet, almost eerily so. The once stifling tension that had lingered in every corner of the house was gone, replaced by a peaceful stillness. For Ben and Ava, it was the start of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, but also relief and hope. Ben sat at the dining room table early one morning, sipping his coffee and staring out the window. The sunlight streamed in, bathing the room in a warm glow. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe again. Ava appeared moments later, still in her pajamas, her messy braids swinging as she walked into the kitchen. "Morning, kiddo," Ben said, his voice soft but cheerful. "Morning," Ava replied, yawning as she poured herself a glass of orange juice. She joined her dad at the table, glancing at the stack of papers he'd been reading. "What's all that?" she asked, gesturing toward the documents. Ben sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Just some legal stuff. I'm making sure everything's in order so Jessica can't come back and try to take anything." He hesitated, then added, "I've also been looking into setting up something for you, a trust or a savings account maybe. I want to make sure you're taken care of no matter what." Ava's eyes widened slightly. "You don't have to do that, Dad." "Yes, I do," Ben said firmly. "I should have been more careful before. I let someone into our lives who didn't deserve to be here, and I'm not going to make that mistake again. I want to protect what's ours. What's yours?" Ava nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thanks, Dad." Over the next few weeks, life began to feel normal again. Ben threw himself into his work, taking on new projects to keep his mind busy, while Ava focused on school and her writing. She spent hours filling her diary with thoughts, reflections, and even little stories inspired by everything they had been through. One afternoon, Ava was sitting in her room, writing, when Ben knocked on the door. "Got a minute?" he asked, poking his head in. "Sure," Ava said, setting her pen down. Ben stepped inside, holding something behind his back. "I know it's been a tough few months, and I wanted to do something to remind you how proud I am of you." Ava tilted her head curiously. "What is it?" With a smile, Ben revealed a small, leather-bound journal. It was dark blue with gold edges, simple but beautiful. "I saw this at the bookstore the other day and thought of you. I figured it might be time for a fresh start, not just for us, but for your writing too." Ava's eyes lit up as she took the journal from him, running her fingers over the smooth cover. "It's perfect." "Thanks, Dad. I know you don't always say everything you're feeling out loud," Ben said, sitting down beside her. "But I hope you'll keep writing. It's one of the things that makes you you." Ava smiled, clutching the journal to her chest. "I will." One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching a movie, Ava glanced at her dad. He seemed more relaxed, even happy, in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. She paused the movie, earning a confused look from Ben. "What's up?" he asked. "I just wanted to say thank you," Ava said, "for believing me, for listening, even if it took a while." Ben chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, thank you, Ava. You saw the truth when I couldn't. You stood up for us when I didn't have the strength to. If anything, I should be thanking you." They sat in silence for a moment before Ben added, "You know, your mom would have been so proud of you." Ava's throat tightened, and she blinked back tears. "I hope so." "She would," Ben said firmly. "And so am I." In the months that followed, Ben and Ava rebuilt their lives, piece by piece. They talked more openly, sharing their fears, hopes, and dreams. Their bond, once strained by the chaos Jessica had brought into their lives, was now stronger than ever. Ava began to find joy in the little things again, reading by the window, going for walks with her dad, and writing in her new journal. Her words flowed more freely now, no longer weighed down by the fear and tension that had once consumed her. Ben, too, found a sense of peace he hadn't realized he was missing. He focused on creating a stable, happy home for Ava, determined to protect the life they had built together. One day, as Ava sat at her desk, scribbling in her journal, she paused to reread the last few lines. They were simple but meaningful, a reflection of everything she had learned. The truth is, families aren't perfect. They're messy and complicated, and sometimes they fall apart. But when you find the people who truly love you, the ones who stand by you no matter what, That's what makes a family real. And I'm lucky to have that with my dad. Ava smiled, closing the journal and placing it on the shelf next to her old one. She felt lighter, freer, as though she'd finally let go of the weight she'd been carrying for so long. Downstairs, Ben called her for dinner, and Ava headed to the kitchen, her heart full of gratitude. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The story ends with the two of them sitting at the table, laughing over a silly joke Ben made, the house filled with warmth and love. A new beginning had truly begun.